Tonight, I have no guest for you in this first section. We're just going to be reviewing some of the major policies and campaign promises that were made. And I want to hear your feedback. So we have an open conversation between me and you in the chat. And I want to hear what you think about these major economic policies. Are they doable? Are they practical? Is it something that could or would or will sway your vote on election day tomorrow? So both the PNP and the JLP have made some interesting proposals from an economic standpoint, and I want to go over just a few of them tonight, starting with the most recent campaign promise coming from Team JLP. And that most recent promise, as you may have heard, is they're going to double the minimum wage. It's currently at 16,000 Jamaican dollars per week. They are planning to double it to 32,000 over the next 5 years. Let's play the clip.
The livable wage simply is what the average person needs to survive for rent, utilities, education, food, and emergencies. So, over the next few years, in our third term, we will double the minimum wage from $16,000, what we have carried it to now, having almost tripled it, to $32,000.
So that plan is to double, or that announcement is to double the minimum wage. Bearing in mind that the JLP has increased the minimum wage several times over its past 10 years in office. I believe when they came in, it was at about $6,200, and it's now $16,000. And I remember having this conversation several times when these announcements have been made, saying that it is not practical, people are going to get laid off. And I remember when I was at NNN, we had this debate on the air as well about the livable wage and whether it is something that employers would be able to afford. And there was a lot of skepticism at the time, including coming from myself. And right now I'm here thinking, gosh, because at the time I was on the side of the employees. Now I'm over on the other side as an employer, and I'm thinking 32,000. Okay, I've always prided myself on paying my staff well above minimum wage, but moving to 32,000, for some people on the team, not the main team, but there are some freelance people who work with me that 32,000 is going to be out of budget. And so I have to think as an employer now and think, okay, how can we make this work? So from the employer standpoint, and I hear what PSOJ is saying and what the JMEA is saying and the Employers Federation are saying, but at the same time, I also remember these same conversations being had and all of these organizations raising the very same concerns, saying, well, it's not practical, it's not feasible. And when you think about who earns minimum wage and who pays minimum wage, because a lot of people such as helpers and gardeners, security officers, those are the ones who are earning minimum wage. Now, if you as a household, as an individual, employ a household helper, and your household helper is currently employed at 16, let's say in the range between $16,000 and $20,000 a week, and now they're telling you you need to double that to at least 32,000, even though it's going to be phased in over time, that might end up being burdensome on those people who have to pay these wages. And so will it mean that there is going to be less employment? It's a legitimate question. However, based on the track record, unemployment has actually gone down, even though the minimum wage has gone up. But let me see if any of you have any comments so far on this particular issue. I want to know, what do you think about doubling the minimum wage? Is this a feasible policy change by the JLP? Do you trust them to implement it? Would it lead to unemployment? Let me see what you guys are saying. So 0 Day says, I'm voting from Canada. How do you vote from Canada, 0 Day? Are you coming? Did you fly in? How does that work? Diplomat says we need mail-in voting. I disagree. If you want to vote, come to Jamaica. Come and cast your vote in person here and see what the experiences, the lived experiences on the ground are in the constituency in which you are voting. Yamput says, greetings from Grenada. Epiphany says, 150% agree. I'm very disappointed about still not being able to vote from overseas. Orville says, desperation, I tell you. So, you know, minimum wage is one of those issues that always comes into play right around election time because politicians want to pander to the voters, to the people who are likely to come out to vote, and the people who are going to say, well, what's in it for me directly? So they've already pandered to the middle class by saying that, well, we're going to raise the income tax threshold. That's the PNP's promise to $3.5 million. Now, the JLP is countering that by pandering to the lower class and saying, well, okay, rich people going to take the 3.5 or the reduction in income tax to one. How much is it? I don't even remember. And I'm going to go over that shortly. And no, lower class people, here's something for you. We're going to double the minimum wage. So let's see what else you guys are saying. Clayton says, when JLP says no new tax, food price go up. The diplomat says some of the PNP's proposals are very unattainable, and the minimum wage proposal might seem unattainable, but I see he has done the increases successfully before. And then diplomat again says the epiphany effect, we need to become more technologically advanced. We need more services to be online. All right, the next thing that we are going to discuss is the income tax promises. And my system just logged me out here. So let me just quickly log back in so we can bring up the clips. Because income tax has been one of those major campaign issues. And the irony is not lost on me that in the 2016 general election, the JLP's campaign promise to raise the income tax threshold to $1.5 million, I believe was a major factor in them winning that election. 1.5 was a huge campaign promise, and they were able to deliver on that campaign promise. And so the irony now is that PNP, who back then said it couldn't be done, is now saying, all right, I see your 1.5. Let's more than double that, 3.5. Let's make it 3.5. But let's go to the clips. So the discussion about the party's income tax promises have gotten the most attention over the past few weeks. PNP says raise the income tax threshold to 3.5 million. And this was one of the hot topics between Mark Golding and Julian Robinson during the election debates.
Mr. Golding, Keith Duncan says the PNP's proposal to increase the income tax threshold to 3.5 million is impractical and impossible to fund without new taxes. Can you explain how these planned tax breaks will work without hurting the economy?
The context in which we have decided to increase the threshold to 3.5 million is the hollowing out of the middle class in this country. Working families finding it extremely difficult to make ends meet. And we believe with the debt to GDP ratio having now, after 13 and a half years of belt tightening and austerity, having now reached the cusp of the target of 60% of GDP introduced into the fiscal rules in law under Portia Simpson Miller, this is a time, this year it's expected actually, with the readjustment of the definition and calculation of GDP, this is the year that we expect to achieve that target. That will release 2.5% to 3% of GDP of additional resources, which were not previously budgeted for in the fiscal policy paper. That is more than sufficient to pay for our entire program, including the $3.5 million increase to 3.5 million of the tax threshold, which will make our civil servants and our middle managers, and indeed most of Jamaicans who are presently suffering under the high burden of the cost of living, have money that they can spend.
So that's Mark Golding, opposition leader, and Julian Robinson, opposition spokesman on finance, also addressed the issue in the finance debate, the debate on the economy.
PNP has promised to move the income tax threshold to $3.5 million starting April 2026 without any new taxes. How much will it cost? Is the timeline realistic, and which programs will be adjusted to accommodate the increase?
Question, Andrew. We are committed to implementing the 3.5 threshold starting April 2026. This will be funded from revenue growth, which currently, based on the 1% growth, is projected to generate an additional revenue of $140 billion over a 3-year period. Additionally, we expect within the envelope that exists in the budget has 4 main components. You have debt servicing, you have salaries and wages, you have the capital budget, and then you have the programmatic budget. As a political party, we would have our own priorities, and we will look at the programmatic budget and make adjustments there. But we will begin implementing the 3.5 million threshold April 2026. However, there are other programs that we have announced that once we assume office, we will immediately, within the envelope that exists for programs, see how we will implement them. For example, ensuring that every needy child gets a hot meal per day, the first in family who goes to university to have a full scholarship, and also the $500,000 grant, which will be given to young first-time owners. So we are going to ensure that we do this in a responsible way fiscally without affecting the budget.
Thank you, Team PNP. Thank you, Team JLP. Your rebuttal.
Lies, lies, lies. It cannot be done without imposing new taxes on the backs of Jamaicans. Your 3.5 is the biggest political scam.
That's Favour Williams, Finance Minister, responding to Julian Robertson during the debate on the economy last week. I think that was on Thursday. You know, it's like I said, it's very interesting that the PNP has now come out swinging with this particular campaign promise, which was basically improving upon the JLP's campaign promise that won them the election in 2016. And in this particular election, where the margins are so close according to the polls, it could possibly make the difference. Now, will that make a bigger difference, or will the JLP's promise to double the minimum wage make a bigger difference? How many people are in both categories? How many people are going to be directly impacted by both set of promises? And how many of those people are actually going to come out to vote? Now, can it be done? Well, in 2016, I was very skeptical that the income tax threshold could be doubled to 1.5, but it was done. And the funny thing about the PNP's argument now in how they say that they're going to fund this increase to 3.5 is that they're basically saying the economy has improved so much, debt to GDP is down so much that we now have the room to do it. And I feel like the JLP lost a crucial opportunity to rebut that by saying that, well, if you're going to get the money because of the improvements in the economy, we did that. We're the ones who are making your plan possible. I feel like they didn't adequately capture that during the debate. The point has been made subsequently, but they missed that golden opportunity. Because normally during an election time or an election year, you would hear politicians saying the other side, especially the opposition is going to say, this government has wrecked the economy. The PNP in this instance is saying, this government has done so well for the economy that we are now able to increase the income tax threshold if we are elected to office. I feel like that is a really key point that maybe has not been emphasized enough. And I think that argument from the PNP actually works in the JLP's favor. So let's take some comments before we move on to the JLP's promise as it relates to income tax. 0 Day says the key to remember is that this increase will be gradual, which we also have to take into consideration the growth of the economy over time. Raquel reminding you to like and comment. Orin says, with all that's going on in St. Anne and how don't you look like foreign, I will do the right thing September 3. Christopher says the PNP announced plans to increase the tax-free threshold from 1.8 to 3.5 million effective April 2026. And there was little to no concern from JMA and these other bodies. So actually, they did not say that it's going to go straight to 3.5 April 2026. They did say that it's going to be a phased approach. So I don't know what's going to be phase one, phase two, phase three, and over how long do they intend for it to get to 3.5. But I do not believe that what they have said is that it would be implemented. 3.5 would be implemented April 2026. It was going to be, the intention is for it to be a phased approach. And also to mention, the JLP has already announced plans, even before in the previous budget presentation, to raise the income tax threshold again. Next year it's going to 1.9 million, and the following year it's going to 2 million. 0 Days says, remember the minimum wage was 6,000 and now it's 16,000. Did we lose any business because of this? Exactly the point I was making before. It was said that it's going to cause mass unemployment, and instead the opposite has happened. There has been record low unemployment. Dee says, I think this increase in the minimum wage will allow those earners to offer their services to more people with a more sophisticated labor contract rather than work full-time for one person for less money. Christopher says, the JLP announced doubling the minimum wage over time, 3 years, and the sky is falling. Over 5 years, they said it would be, no? Over 5 years, over the course of their next term, which is 5 years. Ayrton Sounds, for those who earn above minimum wage, does the increase benefit them as well? Does this mean employers will increase salary? I think it likely will, because if the minimum wage is now 16,000, and let's say you earn 20,000, and there are tiers within the pay scale of an organization. If your lowest tier is 16,000 and that's going up to 32,000, then the person who was at 20 is going to have to go up as well, so that they're not at the lowest tier. I believe that's how it is going to work. Anyway, because you can't have the minimum wage earner earning more than somebody who is senior to them, or the same thing as somebody that is senior to them. So what it would do is push up all the salary scales indeed. Jonathan says, I believe that increasing the minimum wage to 32,000 will help workers afford basic necessities like rent and food. However, for this to be effective, the government should provide a tax break. The next thing that we haven't fully discussed is the impact of this minimum wage increase on inflation. So with more people spending, there is going to be more demand for goods, and that increased demand may very likely have an impact on inflation, meaning the price of goods and services are going to go up. We saw what happened when teachers in the public sector got a raise last year. It meant that, well, teachers in the private sector, prep school teachers, also had to get a raise, which meant that those school fees in many instances were doubled. So there are additional impacts, additional effects of raising the wages for those low-income earners. Humble Boss says by 2030 it will be feasible because they're going to increase it in stages. Orville says no matter how you spin it, desperation. The Diplomat says PNP planning their budget on the successful economy of the JLP, and they're saying people are suffering and the economy is bad. Both can't be true simultaneously. That's exactly the point I was making. It's a very interesting argument to say that we're going to do all this stuff because the economy is great, but the economy is not great because you guys wrecked the economy. You're not doing a good job. But because you've done a good job, we can implement these policies that we promised. Oren says it's an employee's market. Jobs are becoming available daily. And for those who don't want to pay good wages, they will have to run less hours. People now have options. It's a good look, Jamaica. Love it. All right, I'm going to save some more of the comments for the next point. This is Julian Robinson again, because he was asked a follow-up question about what programs the government plans to cut.
14 PMP, I did not hear the cost of the proposed increase in the threshold, nor the programs to be readjusted to accommodate the increase.
The cost of the increase in the threshold would be $55 billion. Now, no political party implements every single thing in 1 year. So we are going to ensure that the implementation is done, which protects the fiscal sacrifices that have been made and will ensure that the adjustments are consistent with the budget. So it's $55 billion that this particular program will cost. And in terms of the readjustment of programs, that is something that we will do once we get into office. When we look, we have priorities which are different from the current government's priorities, and we will make those adjustments within the envelope of $360 billion, which currently exists for programs in the
Thank you,
budgets.
Team.
So PNP saying that they're not going to cut basically any programs because the money is there to do it. And let me also say this, for those of you who've been following me long enough, you know that I'm an advocate of the complete abolition of income tax. So raising the threshold to 3.5 is something I do think is doable and I think should be done, but I think it should go even further and income tax should be abolished entirely, especially at the level of 3.5. If you leave it at 3.5, then there's only a handful of people who are still paying income tax. So why are we going to burden just this very small group of people with income tax when everybody else is paying no income tax? To me, that is unfair for people in that particular tax bracket. Middle income people and some of the higher income as well. Let's take some more. Oh no, I wanted to come to the JLP's clip. So there was some back and forth over the JLP's plan. So the JLP has taken a different approach this time around. Before, their approach has been in gradually raising the income tax threshold. And now that they've gotten it to a certain point and they plan to take it to 2 million, now what they want to do is focus on bringing down the rate of personal income tax that you will be paying. So currently you pay 25% income tax on all your earnings above $1.8 million. The JLP says that if they are elected, they are going to reduce that rate to 15%. And there was some back and forth over that point during the debates. We have the clip. Oh, we don't have the clip. All right. Unfortunately, we don't have that clip, but that was Finance Minister Favour Williams making that point during the debate last week. And she said it was going to cost about $20 to $30 million to implement. Later at a press conference, she revised that to, I think, 38 million to 44 million. And the PNP said it's going to cost a lot more than that. But I did do a piece analyzing the cost of both parties' income tax plans, income tax objectives, and how much it's going to cost, whether it is feasible. And I'd encourage you to take a look at that. In the meantime, let me take some more of your comments. Let me see what you guys are saying about it. But I lost my place. I have to find back where I was. And I also have to screen some of these comments because some of you are saying some things in the comments that I cannot repeat on air. All right, 0 Day says, first they complain that I'm now feel the growth in the economy for the normal man. Now the threshold and minimum wage increase, it's still a problem. Oren says, Cal, what is a programmatic budget? What kind of funds are allocated there? Is the funds there to play with? Won't programs become displaced? Remember, our government has control over whatever projects they want to fund, over how they intend to allocate funds. That's why it's called the consolidated fund. The budget, the money to run the country all goes into what they call the consolidated fund. It's one place, it's one account that you draw from and you decide where you're going to allocate certain things. Different governments have different priorities. That's why you see in the US, for example, President Trump has come in, the Republican Party have come into power, and they've decided that they're going to cut certain programs because those are not their priorities. And the PNP has the same prerogative if they are to come into office as well. They may say, we don't really see the need to spend here. We prefer to spend over here because this is more aligned with our philosophy as a political party. D says, I noticed that too and really didn't stick it to them with that. Oh, the same point I was making earlier. Oren, oh gosh. Employment only increases in BPOs. D says the person making 20K pay would have to go up. Exactly what I was saying. So all salary scales would also have to increase. Shell says PNP can't even run them house, let alone an entire country. But I also don't like any one party to be in power for more than 10 consecutive years. Jamaicans better not repeat an 18 years thing. And I think that is going to be a major sticking point for a lot of Jamaicans because of that legacy of the 18 years. A lot of people are wary of giving any political party 3 consecutive terms. So there may be people out there who think the JLP has done a great job, but they do not want to give any party a 3rd term. And understandably so. What we have seen in the past is that when parties get too much time in power, that's when the corruption really starts. Let me not say starts getting bad, because there's almost always going to be corruption at some level in politics. But when it really starts getting ugly is when these parties get too much time in power. And I think that is going to play a major role in what Jamaicans are feeling when they go to the polls tomorrow, perhaps even more so than the individual promises made by the parties. So one, you have to weigh, do I trust this government to remain in power? Or no, do I not trust any politicians to be in power for that long? Because should they get a 3rd term, this is going to be 15 years of the JLP. Do you trust these people for 15 years of running the country? It's coming pretty close to that 18-year reign by the PNP. Oren says, I feel it's kind of high, but oh, okay, this is not on the election. Lanesra says, if you look at adding 3,500 onto minimum wages per year, it looks feasible and will work out to double in the next 5 years. But the thing is, it's not 3,500 a month, it's 3,500 a week. So 3,500 a week is times that by 4 is 14,000 extra a month per employee if you have multiple employees. So I don't know. That's a tricky one. NutriFit says the economy cannot be great at 1% per annum. What type of stupidity is that? And funny enough, if I was to have been able to make it to the debates this year, I would have re-asked my same question that I asked at the last debate, which was in 2020. What happened to 5 and 4? Remember that campaign promise? It wasn't a campaign promise. It was after. It was the Economic Growth Council led by Michael Lee Chin. There was this huge press conference and lots of glitz and glamour promising 5 and 4, 5% economic growth within 4 years. It's been 10 years and we haven't come anywhere close to 5% economic growth. Although I feel like, and I've been feeling this way for some time now, that Jamaica is on the cusp of achieving higher economic growth. It just has been continued to be elusive. If I was at the debate asking questions, that would have been one of my questions. What happened to 5 and 4? Why do we still not have the economic growth we've been craving? Lamore says the 3.5 won't be done in 1 year, but then again, it will be all done next year. I'm not sure I understand that comment. NutriFit says GCT is more burdensome. Customers actually pay 33% when they shop. Consumers pay the GCT for the manufacturers. Why is that 33% on NutriFit? Where does 33% come in? GCT is 15%. And don't forget as well that that was also rolled back by the JLP because it was 17.5% when they came into office. Lanesra says the finance minister is not good at debating, hence she never took the opportunity to take advantage of what Julian had said. If JLP win, I hope she's replaced as finance minister. There was a whole team. It wasn't just her, and nobody took that opportunity. Raquel says they still don't give me nothing near 300%. Shells says the rich paying for the poor to push out baby every 9 months. This is a global problem, which is why I have no problem with people hiding their money and not paying tax. Okay. Jason says if PNP wins the first program, they will cut. The first program they will cut is the road rehabilitation program. Why? What makes you say that, Jason? Day and Night says JLP is doing a good job so far. Jonathan says, I totally agree that we should eliminate income tax altogether. It's not fair, and it really puts a strain on everyone. Lower earners definitely deserve some relief. T says, if the party is doing well for 18 years, what's the problem? Well, if they're doing well, you vote them in again, right? But the problem is the fear of corruption and people stealing the people's money. So Kimar says, I think it's fine to pay 15% tax. The country has been growing over the last couple of years off taxpayers. How will the country grow if they move the threshold to $3.5 million? All right, let's leave it there. We have a lot more comments, but I want to keep your comments coming in the chat. Let's continue this discussion. Are you excited? Are you going to be voting in the election tomorrow?